A sitting president, riling the nation during a crisis. In an interview with a sympathetic columnist, Mr. Trump smeared him as a doddering candidate who doesn't know he's alive. The caustic attack coincided with a barrage of digital ads from Mr. Trump's campaign mocking Mr. Biden for verbal miscues and implying that he is in mental decline. Even those who have grown used to Mr. Trump's conduct in office may have found themselves newly alarmed by the grim spectacle of a sitting president deliberately stoking the country's divisions and pursuing personal vendettas in the midst of a crisis that has Americans fearing for their lives and livelihoods. Since well before he became president, Mr. Trump's appetite for conflict has defined him as a public figure. In private, Mr. Trump has been plainly aggrieved at the loss of his central argument for re-election. A number of Republican operatives believe Mr. Biden's advantage is soft and that his penchant for gaffes will at least make the race more competitive than it would otherwise be amid a pandemic and an incipient economic depression. Still, Mr. Trump's behavior has rattled even some supportive Republicans, who believe it is likely to backfire and possibly cost them the Senate as well as the White House. It has also further alarmed Democrats, who have long warned that Mr. Trump would be willing to use every lever of presidential power and deploy even the most unscrupulous campaign tactics to capture a second term. In many respects, Mr. Trump's approach to the 2020 election looks like a crude approximation of the way he waged the 2016 campaign against Hillary Clinton, attacking her personal ethics, often in false or exaggerated terms, taking Mrs. Clinton's admitted errors and distorting them with the help of online disinformation merchants, and making wild claims about her physical health and mental capacity for the job. Given that the 2016 campaign, the only one Mr. Trump has ever run, ended in a razor-thin victory for him, it is perhaps not surprising that the president would attempt a kind of sequel in 2020. But there are vitally important differences between 2016 and 2020, ones that amplify the risks involved both for Mr. Trump and for the country he is vying to lead. He is running against an opponent in Mr. Biden who, despite his vulnerabilities, has not faced decades of personal vilification, as Mrs. Clinton did before running for president. And unlike 2016, Mr. Trump has a governing record to defend, one that currently involves presiding over a pandemic that has claimed more than 80,000 American lives, and he may not find it easy to change the subject with incendiary distractions. Yet with the responsibility to govern also comes great power, and Mr. Trump has instruments available to him in 2020 that he did not have as a candidate 4 years ago. Tools like a politically supportive attorney general, a Republican-controlled Senate determined to defend him, and a vastly better financed campaign apparatus that has been constructed with the defining purpose of destroying his opponent's reputation. His attacks over the last week on Mr. Obama have showcased Mr. Trump's persistent determination to weaponize those tools to bolster a favorite political narrative, one that distorts the facts about Mr. Flynn, the president's former national security advisor, in order to spin sinister implications about the previous administration. But Mr. Trump also appears to genuinely believe many of the conspiratorial claims he makes people close to him say, and his anger at Mr. Obama is informed less by political strategy than by an unbending and unsubstantiated belief that the former president was personally involved in a plot against him. This weekend, Mr. Trump will huddle with some of his conservative allies in the House at Camp David, where they are expected to discuss the efforts, entirely fruitless up to this point, to prove Mr. Obama was involved in a conspiracy. Of all Mr. Trump's efforts, this one may be among the least concerning to Democrats, given Mr. Obama's strong popularity and the degree to which Mr. Trump's claims of an Obamagate scandal have been confined so far to the usual echo chambers of Fox News and right-wing social media. Democratic anxiety about the president's attacks on Mr. Biden runs higher. But in general, Mr. Biden's advisers have professed confidence that the severity of the country's problems will make it difficult for Mr. Trump to retake control of the campaign, and that Mr. Biden's fundamental political strengths make him well positioned to survive a campaign of attempted character assassination. The president has been grumbling about his own campaign and this week complained to allies that he had not significantly outraised Mr. Biden in April, according to a Republican who spoke with Mr. Trump. Still, Mr. Trump's political operation has moved over the last month to devise a plan for tearing down Mr. Biden, who does not inspire great enthusiasm in voters but is held in higher esteem by most than the incumbent president. The result has been a blizzard of negative digital and television ads, battering Mr. Biden on a range of subjects in a way that suggests Mr. Trump's advisers have not yet settled on a primary line of attack. The campaign's ads on Facebook are as relentless as they are varied, as if plucked from a vintage Trump rally rant. Some make unfounded inferences about Mr. Biden's mental state, saying geriatric health is no laughing matter. Others paint the presumptive Democratic nominee as China's puppet by highlighting statements that Mr. Biden made when he was vice president, like "China is not our enemy." Still others stick to traditional themes of illegal immigration. Over the last week, the Trump campaign has spent at least $880,000 on Facebook ads attacking Mr. Biden. Yet there are persistent doubts, even within Mr. Trump's political circle, that an overwhelmingly negative campaign can be successful in 2020, particularly when many voters are likely to be looking for a combination of optimism, empathy and steady leadership, at a moment of crisis unlike any in living memory. And the more Mr. Trump lashes out at Mr. Biden and others, the more he may cement in place the reservations of voters who are accustomed to seeing presidents react with resolute calm in difficult situations. Private Republican polling has shown Mr. Trump slipping well behind Mr. Biden in a number of key states. Perhaps just as troubling for Mr. Trump, it has raised questions about whether his efforts to tar Mr. Biden are making any headway. Last month, a poll commissioned by the Republican National Committee tested roughly 20 lines of attack against Mr. Biden, ranging from the private business activities of his son, Hunter Biden, to whether Mr. Biden has lost a step, a reference to mental acuity. Mr. Trump has also been warned by Republican veterans that his efforts to define Mr. Biden in negative terms so far have been slow or ineffective. Part of the challenge, though, is that Mr. Trump constantly undermines his own team's strategy, in ways big and small. And Mr. Trump's appetite for conspiracy theories is often embarrassing to his party. Several times in recent weeks, he has falsely accused a prominent television host of murder and called for a cold case investigation. When Mr. Trump was visiting Pennsylvania this week, for instance, his team scheduled a friendly interview, in the hope that he would make the case that Mr. Biden would undermine fracking, an important industry, in Pennsylvania. Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, and subscribe.